So before I studied law, I studied science and I was an environmental health officer, and for several years I worked for Onehunga Borough Council inspecting pretty much every industrial premise in Onehunga, looking at their chemical storage, and generally horrified about the lack of respect for the dangers of poisons and the way they were disposed of down the drains and without proper protective gear or precautions. Well, look, that was probably close to 30 years ago, and a lot of it hasn't really changed, unfortunately. We seem to not appreciate that poisons are poisons. They're called poisons because they're harmful. And we seem to have this culture in New Zealand of lack of respect for them. One of the projects I did when I was studying law was a 10,000 word research paper on the lack of enforcement of environmental law and the just almost disregard for enforcement and lack of resources for enforcing and lack of action for people who broke the law. And unfortunately, the guys that don't follow the law in the environmental issues know that they're going to get away with it. Well, it's really unbelievable that 26 tonnes of poison bait can be dropped on our land, forest, water and riverbeds, and nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to think there's any harmful effect at all, or at least nobody in authority thinks that. Look, I think there's a real disconnect between New Zealanders wanting clean water and the New Zealand government dropping poison all over our clean water. It doesn't make sense, and there are risks all around. There are risks for the environment, there are risks for primary production and for our food exports, there are risks for the health of our people, there are risks for our tourism reputation, and there's a huge risk for our clean, green New Zealand image. Look, the public needs to be informed, and there's not actually that much information, at least on mainstream media, about what's going on. It's almost become a secret that the government is putting so much poison over our land. So I think the people who do know needs to share that information. The media need to explain that information. We need to have an informed conversation about it so people understand what's being done, why it's being done, the risks of it being done, and whether it's effective or not, whether there's any other better way of doing it. At the moment, we're not even getting those conversations. We're not very good at learning from overseas experience in New Zealand. We seem to have to reinvent our own wheel, and we're often about 10 or 20 years behind overseas. I don't understand why we don't look, listen and learn. The problem we have in New Zealand is that the government tend to employ the experts who have the views that suit what they want to do. So they don't necessarily choose the best expert, they choose the convenient expert. And the experts know that if they don't give the government the advice that the government want to hear, they won't get any more work from the government. So it's a really, really dangerous cycle. Our decisions are not being made on the best expert evidence. Look, I'm a big optimist. I'm hopeful that with a new government we'll have a new attitude, and I think we're starting to see that already. We've got to have an attitude of listening to the people and putting all of the issues on the table, not just the issues that they choose for us to talk about, but actually the issues that matter to people. So the ethics, the long-term effects, there's a whole range of issues that haven't ever been looked at in the poisoning debate. So we have issues about the cruelty to animals. On the one hand, we have laws protecting animal welfare, and on the other hand, we have a massive exemption that's been carved out for poisoning not only the predators that are the target species, but also the incidental bykill, the native birds, the frogs, the other invertebrates, the microorganisms, the deer, the big animals that are killed as well. Then we have people's dogs and cats and all the incidental other harm that's caused by poisons. So none of those issues seem to be factored in. There seems to be an assumption that there will be no harm. But that's not true. We know it's not true. We know that there's bykill of the very species that are supposed to be being protected. So the main issue from my perspective is we're preparing for the Court of Appeal. We've already had 2 preliminary rulings from the Court of Appeal that have recognised that we have an important arguable case and that there's a public interest in having this case resolved. So now we have to do the rest of the preparatory work to get the case into the Court of Appeal as soon as we can. Look, there's always a lot of challenges getting to court because you're up against the corporates with the money who are trying to block the public from being heard. And we're seeing this with the cost issue where it looks like some of the interests who are pro-poisoning are trying to close us down so we never actually make it to the Court of Appeal. I have more confidence in the judicial system than that, but I do think it's very important that as the public get their case into court and they're not bullied along the way. I haven't done the calculation, but I know that they're talking bigger and bigger areas every year of poisoning in New Zealand. And the cumulative effect is just horrendous when you think of the lack of evidence, firstly, that it actually works, and secondly, of the lack of evidence and assessment of the harm that it actually does. It's a massive, dangerous experiment. I think it's really important that MPI get far more proactive on poisoning and actually target to try and find the problem rather than letting it get exported, our foods get exported, getting picked up overseas and tarnishing New Zealand's reputation. The sitting back and she'll be right attitude is not good enough. We need to live up to the reputation that we're telling the world. If we want to be called clean and green, we actually have to act clean and green. Look, there are so many new technologies coming onto the scene with the rechargeable trapping, with drones that have got night vision that can specifically target different species. There's so many opportunities. If we must go and poison things, let's at least make sure we're poisoning the things that we really want to poison and not poisoning everything else. And if we can avoid poison completely and we have to trap things, well, let's do that. But let's just stop and think about what we really are trying to achieve and not just have this kill mentality. Let's be smart, clean, green New Zealand rather than poisoned, unclean New Zealand. You know, there are so many better ways of doing things, but we actually need a conversation where the public can have a say as well and we can get a holistic answer that fits what we need and what we want. We're not doing it the right way at the moment. Look, New Zealanders don't like to cause trouble, they like to go with the flow, and we live in a beautiful place with lovely beaches and sunshine and lots of distractions, but it affects us all. We're all in it together. We all need to understand what's going on and do what we can to make things be done a better way.